Educate. So this is a first of our Coda Educate sessions. Natalie's going to just open with a bit of an acknowledgement of country, and then I'm going to run through the background of Coda Educate and thank some of our supporters.
The traditional owners of the land upon which we stand, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And wherever you are in the world, we ask that you just take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which you stand. Welcome to Coda Zero.
So thanks, Nat. So we're really proud to collaborate with Philips, who are supporting this educational event. Philips aims to offer access to world-class healthcare education in order to enhance performance of healthcare professionals and improve patient outcomes. This premise is really, I guess, the core of the Educate pillar for Coda. We've carried the medium is the message concept forward from SMAC, and we're really wanting to facilitate open access to high quality education and also tackle topics that are really pertinent to our community and driven by community feedback. So without further ado, welcome to Coda Zero Educate session. Really excited to have you on board and hoping to go away with some really good prototypes for change.
Now, you mentioned journalism, so that seems like a good opportunity to give our journalist, Melissa, an opportunity to speak. So Melissa is a public health journalist and managing editor of a non-profit public interest journalism organisation, Croaky Health Media. Thank you for coming back to join us, Melissa, because you did speak a little bit earlier on. Croaky focuses on health equity and the determinants of health, including the climate crisis. And Melissa, I think it'd be really helpful for you to start off by telling us why public interest media is so important.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country where I'm coming to you from, the Malakadi people in southern Lutruwita, Tasmania, elders past, present and emerging. And also like to acknowledge Megan Williams and other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who may be participating today. Yes, well, it was just interesting listening to Simon talking about problems with the evidence base in medical journals, and that's not even getting to the impact of President Donald Trump on Twitter. So I think, you know, considering the whole media ecosystem is very important when we're talking about evidence. But I was asked to talk to you about letting the truth get in the way of a good story, which is what we try to do at Croaky. And it's a timely topic this week, with tens of thousands of Australians rushing to sign a petition from a former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, calling for a royal commission to ensure a strong, diverse Australian news media, because this is not what we have now. The petition outlines the problems bedeviling the media sector, from the toxic concentration of market power that is News Corp to the cuts decimating a national institution that we should be treasuring and nurturing, that is the ABC, also acknowledge SBS and NITV there, to attacks on media freedom. Imagine police raiding journalists, imagine. But the truth is that I cannot tell you a single story. Truth is always more complicated than that. And the truth is that we are facing multiple interconnected and overlapping crises. The crisis in public interest journalism is not new. It's been happening for some years now, but it's not well understood by the wider community. Now the pandemic has brought us to what some have called an extinction event for public interest journalism. Certainly many communities in Australia and around the world have lost their local news sources just at this time, when trusted, reliable, independent news really matters. But I cannot talk to you about the crisis in public interest journalism without thinking about its interconnections with the planetary crisis, climate change and environmental degradation. Nor can I talk to you about the crisis in public interest journalism without making connections, and the planetary crisis, without making connections to the institutional racism that is so embedded across our societies. And linking in, following on from Meg's talk, you know, I think linked to that is disrespect for Indigenous knowledges and ways of doing and being. I can't talk to you about it without thinking about how neoliberalism is so entrenched that we can have a former Prime Minister and others suggesting that during the pandemic, we should just let the old people die for the sake of the economy. Or think about how housing is now seen as an investment rather than a basic human right. I can't think about these issues without an awareness of how the digital giants, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, are shaping our world in so many ways that are neither transparent nor in the public interest. Just recently, a US House of Reps Judiciary Committee inquiry released its massive report into the market power of these companies. It concluded companies that once were scrappy underdog startups that challenged the status quo have become the kinds of monopolies we last saw in the era of oil barons and railroad tycoons. The inquiry reported that these firms wield their immense market power in ways that erode entrepreneurship, privacy, and undermine the press and democracy itself. Meanwhile, we see the rise of authoritarianism, misinformation, and disinformation, as illustrated by a new study released just overnight on journalism during the pandemic. In Australia and other countries, we worry about the impact of News Corp's power. News Corp is a minnow compared with these companies. As of last month, the combined valuation of the 4 companies investigated by the US committee is more than $5 trillion US. And to be honest, I don't even know what that much money means. The inquiry did estimate, however, that within the next decade, these firms may account for about 1/3, that's 1/3 of the world's gross economic output. The inquiry cited the writings of Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis nearly a century ago. He wrote, "We must make our choice. We may have democracy or we may have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both." The inquiry's report noted, those words speak to us with great urgency today. Related to all these interconnected and overlapping crises is our crisis in governance, whereby our structures and systems are so corrupted, so unfit for purpose, that we seem incapable of mounting a collective, effective response in the face of even an existential threat, the climate crisis. Addressing the crisis in public interest journalism won't fix all of these other crises, but it will help, given the interconnections, given the roles of public interest journalism in scrutinising power, in enabling accountability, and in contributing to informed and engaged communities. So for this audience, I'd say if you care for the community's health and wellbeing, then please engage with public interest journalism as a critical determinant of health. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And that's certainly challenging. One of the things that's come up in all of these talks is bias, and particularly in the context of our access to information and our interpretation. How can we de-bias our access and through using public interest journalism? And what would be your message to health professionals about how we can take action and create an environment where a progressive government can survive and can make the changes that the public health system and our health needs?
Well, I guess I would first of all, direct the conversation away from individual biases. I mean, obviously they're important to address, but I really think it's about engaging upstream, and that's through regulation. We need regulation of digital platforms at all sorts of levels and for all sorts of reasons. We also need policy reform to ensure a sustainable and healthy public interest journalism sector. So, while I'd encourage everyone here to support quality media, it's about so much more than that. And, Kevin Rudd has given us a petition to sign. That's a pretty easy thing. Get online and sign it and engage with public debate around the need for policy reform to ensure a much healthier media landscape. And, as you know, I probably have a Twitter addiction, and so there's a few hashtags that I use on Twitter quite a lot to share related information. So if you look at the hashtag PIJ Matters, that's short for Public Interest Journalism Matters, share a lot of information and resources there around public interest journalism. And, there's often opportunities for the health sector to engage through making submissions, engaging in public debate. And another hashtag that I'm just started using recently, but already, there's quite a lot of resources at it, is regulate digital platforms. So have a look at that hashtag and see, for example, some tweeting about that recent US report released, which I think is a really important document.
Thank you. Jessie, is there anything coming from the audience in terms of reflections or questions that we can ask to Melissa?
I think everyone's probably taking a bit of a breath, because it's quite a dystopian landscape that you sort of painted, and I certainly wouldn't want to actually, I guess, paint that with glitter and sparkles and try and call it anything other than that. I think, again, the message I think that's coming through in some of people's sort of early reflections is the idea of connection being really the only way to overcome that, and connection with people that think differently to us. I guess if there's a message that I could draw back through all of the talks, it's really that's emerging, is if we stay in the echo chamber of our polarized sort of access to media, our polarized sort of the algorithms that feed us polarized content on platforms like Facebook and others, on social media platforms, we aren't really going to overcome this problem. It's going to become, I guess, the end game. So it seems like a lot of the answers that are coming through, and I'll shape this up into a question to go on with, around actually connecting and listening and overcoming our affronts and our offences when someone says something we don't agree with or that makes us uncomfortable. Like Meg said, many things that are said and viewed through an Indigenous lens are fueled by rage, and quite rightly so. And we can't just keep taking that on ourselves and then ended by it. I guess a really good quote from a friend of Smack and Coda, Peter Brindley, that I love is, let's not be offence archaeologists. Let's not try and dig and find offence in everything. Let's actually take that cognitive dissonance, lean into it and go, like Simon says, I've got some stuff to learn. So I suppose in where to next, I think you presented a really interesting point on the upstream determinants of media practices and leaning into that more as individuals. Beyond signing the survey and stuff, what are some of those? Can you elaborate a little bit on what some of those upstream determinants of media practice are?
Well, I guess it's important first to distinguish between public interest journalism and a media sector and organisations and industry. I mean, in a lot of countries, including Australia, there's a dominance of corporate media, particularly News Corp, which, is problematic for so many reasons. So to support new forms of media, and it's not only as a consumer, as I said, really we need substantial policy reform in Australia. Croaky, you would be horrified to know the sort of budget we run on. We have no staff as such, and we can't even get, we've set up as a non-profit, as a health charity, because there is no pathway in Australia to set up as a non-profit journalism organisation. And non-profit models of journalism really offer a really exciting way to better serve communities, to be embedded in communities and actually be accountable to communities. And Meg and I have talked about the ACCHO model, the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation model, which has been so fantastic during the pandemic because of those community connections. That's a great model for journalism as well, non-profit journalism in communities. Providing a platform voice for communities. And in Australia, we have whole, dozens of local government areas with no local media. That means no scrutiny of local councils and other local power bases, no bringing those local communities' issues through for policy attention. So as a health organisation, whether you're a CODA or another type of health organisation, do you actually have a policy on public interest journalism? The health sector puts an awful lot of investment into research and practice around influencing media, invest millions in PR and media and communications teams, but what do you actually invest in supporting development of healthier media policy? So I really think if you can bring public interest journalism into your conceptualizations of health and the social determinants of health. That's a start. Put us in your thinking around research, practice, and policy. And I think also that ties into that advocating for health in all policies. If you're advocating for health in all policies, then you're advocating for a healthier media landscape as well, which brings me to another good hashtag, which is govern for health. I think really health in all policies is a very powerful framework. And I think, what we do at Croaky, I really like to acknowledge Meg and other Aboriginal colleagues at Croaky, because really it's through, your generosity in engaging with us that we've been able to transform how we work. So I really think centering the people and the cultures who've always prioritised caring for country and caring for communities. So it is also around engaging with decolonising methodologies and transforming, challenging Western and neoliberal ways of doing business. So it is, it starts, you do that at all levels, from your own individual practice and ways right through to, governments and what organisations you support, etc. So I'm sorry, I can't think of any simple solutions or answers. I think everyone needs to do everything, and I guess that comes back down to really transforming how we think about public interest journalism. That it's not actually someone else's business. It's no longer the business of News Corp or what was once Fairfax. I think bringing that into your work as everyone's responsibility is really just so important, especially as we see that growth and concentration of power.
Thank you, Melissa. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I for one, am feeling really challenged by what I've heard. I think between the four of you, you've really painted how black and white can be the way that we start to look at things, very, very sort of separate, but actually, and I don't want to use the word grey, I'm going to say how multicoloured and patchwork and interrelated all of this stuff is. So, but I'd like to close by getting each of you to bring us back to something that we can take away, something that we can start with from here. How do we break out of this echo chamber that we're in and stop seeing things in such a polarised way? And how can we confront those affronts we're so used to just switching off and ignoring because it's easier for us? And Meg, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'd make the connection, as a researcher, qual and quant in health, to make a media plan that's part of research translation and that includes using our public interest journalism. In Australia, Croaky, as a non-profit, is there. Partly it builds our capacity as researchers to be better communicators. If we can't do that as researchers because we want to stick with the numbers or the administration, but by all means identify someone within the team that wants to engage with media. It makes us plan research differently when we know that we've got to communicate the results to a wider audience than just policy or professions, because we do need as researchers the support of communities to participate in research and reduce the bias that's associated with it. So a media plan as part of knowledge translation or research translation, definitely.
Thank you. Melissa, I can see your face, so we'll go for you next.
Oh, okay. No, well, we actually have an idea at Croaky, which I'll just float now and sort of building into what Meg said. We're always looking for different ways to do journalism and fund journalism and support journalism. And one way is to build journalism as a discipline into research grants. So if you're doing, big research grants that are likely to be of value, or significance for public interest journalism, consider building it in as a discipline to tell the story around the research all the way through. Not to do media in comms or PR, but to do actual accountability journalism. I think that's a really exciting thing for researchers to think about doing. And we've thought it out at Croaky. We've developed a sort of governance model to protect the ethics of the research as well as the ethics of the journalism.
Thank you very much. Martin, we'll go to you next, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things clinicians can do on the front line in tackling a problem that they're passionate about is collecting data on that problem. There was an interesting finding in the AI space recently that over 60% of health AI papers were based on data from just 3 states in the US: California, New York, and Massachusetts, right? And that clearly introduces some biases in the models that we generate. It creates this great disparity in sort of skill and workforce development. I really think one of the best things we can do in Australia to kind of accelerate the opportunities for AI and digital and advancement of healthcare in general is creating or curating data sets about issues that we are passionate about. And for example, if that includes Indigenous health, let's create the right data sets around that so that the sort of systemic issues can be properly analyzed. And clinicians are in a really powerful position to do that, being at the coalface of medicine.
Thank you, Martin. And Simon, we'll go lastly to you.
Thanks. I'm going to finish with, if it's okay, I'm just going to summarize with a quote, which I used at a SMAC conference many years ago, and I still think it's the one thing which I pin a lot of what I hope to do in the world in terms of evidence is from Maya Angelou, the American writer, poet, and an amazing person. And it simply says, do the best that you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's a really good way to close this session. I'm just going to bounce over to Jessie for the formal closure and to tell us, for us, the audience, what happens next.
I'm just over here pinching myself as an intensive care nurse in Brisbane that I've been able to be part of something as awesome as this. And thank you again to all of our amazing panelists. Thank you also, Natalie, for diving in and being the studio presence. Thanks a lot for that as well. So I'd also like to thank Philips once again for actually supporting us to make this happen. I think it goes without saying now, after Melissa speaking, that the cost of free certainly isn't free. Free consumption or cheap consumption, open access content, it does have a cost burden behind it. So thank you again for the support and partnership with that. Where to from here? We will be back with another Coda Educate session in February as part of the Coda Zero process. Hoping sometime in the not too distant future there'll be an opportunity for us to gather gather face to face once again, although it won't look like the original plans for Coda. To keep part of the conversation and just kind of keep tapped into what's going on, best options are the codachange.org website. You'll see all the content released from these Coda Zero series there. The Coda podcasts as well, on whatever your podcast app is, will have content coming out, and we'll be endeavouring to continue some interviews and ask some unanswered questions with each of these guests. And also Twitter is the great discussion platform for this. It's kind of the home, I guess, the digital platform home of the Coda community. So check out @codachange.org and keep following the Coda Zero hashtag. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for being part of the Coda Zero Educate session.